The fire department record management system is not integrated into the CAD system used for dispatch. That's the current status of things. And that's important because the fire department system has capabilities that our current system does not have, including GPS tracking and things like that. And we have these two different systems. Public safety officers rely on the systems to gain information, gather information from the record management systems that they have available, but they're not able to talk to each other about it. As I said, the mobile data terminals are in all of our police vehicles, and the two in the fire department ambulances are only connected through the fire department RMS, or capable of reaching the fire department RMS. There are 4 fire department vehicles without mobile data terminals. The radio system was updated for both police and fire in August of 2021. And there was an update in what's called the primary transmitter, and which is on the water tower, and other transmitters around the town as well. There was no update on the Magnolia transmitter receiver, Magnolia receiver and transmitter, or the Brookside receiver transmitter. In the feasibility study, the police reported that there were coverage gaps in the Magnolia area, and in a conversation I had with Chief Cleary, he said that those coverage gaps also impacted the fire department in the areas around Ocean Street, Magnolia, Raymond Street, and that area in between, Coolidge Point. There are backup power supplies installed, but there is a lack of a generator to power in case of an outage, and this leads both fire department and police personnel to have to bring a generator with them to a critical incident that they're going to be at for a while, to make sure that they have enough power. Next slide, please. So the question is, why are we revisiting public safety, regional public safety dispatches? Haven't we beaten this horse enough? And the answer to that question involves a number of different issues. Most importantly, in my mind, is the fact that we have low frequency, high risk events that our current system has difficulty responding to. And what I mean by that is, for instance, emergency medical response calls, which require a dedicated dispatcher until on-site personnel arriving at the scene can secure the patient. So the dispatcher should be totally focused on that person who is calling in with a medical emergency until the police and fire department can get there. The police have basic EMT skills, and the fire department has advanced life support skills. And when they have the patient secured, then the dispatcher could drop off. In the meantime, any other calls coming in are a challenge and problematic. This would be the type of incident. This is a potential incident to have backup called in. The average number of emergency response calls in a year between the years of 2018 and 2021 is 540. That's about 1.5 a day. So that may not seem like a large number, but that's an average, and we could have 2 a day or 3 a day, and then none for a couple of days. So these are low frequency events, but they're certainly high risk, particularly if a patient is in severe distress and needs to have dispatch services responding to them and keeping them calm and helping them out with things that they can do until help arrives on the scene. Simultaneous 911 calls, and these are not just emergency response calls, happen between 55 and 75 times a year on average. And simultaneous 911 calls can certainly require multiple dispatchers. So if there were a call for an automobile accident out on 128, dispatch would be following that call. And then if another call came in for emergency medical services, they would need to cover that call as well. Mutual aid response often involves ongoing monitoring by the dispatcher. And this last item is an item that Chief Cleary brought to my attention, which is what's referred to as a Firefighter May Day Event, when a firefighter is in a building and is cut off from getting out of the building or cut off from other firefighters in the area. And that kind of a situation would require a dedicated dispatcher. Next slide, please. Thank you. Other areas that have caused us to revisit regional public safety dispatch include changes in available dispatcher personnel. As you may or may not be aware, there's been police reform legislation, which is causing pressure on reserve officer availability for shifts. Essentially, what that connection is that the police reform legislation requires reserve officers to have all the training that a patrolman would have or a patrol officer would have. And when you train that much, it makes a lot of sense that you go and find yourself a job as a patrol officer. The number of reserve officers, and this has been a long-standing discussion over the past year and a half, 2 years, between Chief Fitzgerald, the town administrator, and the Board of Selectmen about the down pressure on reserve officer availability. That is, losing reserve officers who go out to get a full-time job. The second issue in terms of dispatcher personnel is the cost of police officer overtime for weekends and backfilling. We have to have a dispatch officer on site. And if someone doesn't show up for work or for whatever reason, if someone is out sick, if someone is on vacation, or it's just weekends and we don't have the personnel to cover, we call in regular officers who then work for overtime pay. There is a real need to sort out technology integration. I referred to this when I said that the dispatch system that we currently work under doesn't allow access for both fire and police to the modules of their records management systems, which are very important during dispatch events. Overall software compatibility within the current dispatch center and between the dispatch center and the fire department, and radio coverage for both police and fire, making sure that all radios are working and responsive to computer-aided dispatch. There's also a need, and this is a small need, but it is a need. It was raised at a previous public forum that if our internet service were to go down, what happens to dispatch? And there is a way of doing that, of dealing with that, which is a technological way, and that is to have a backup internet service provider connection. It's called a redundant internet service provider, ISP connection, that would click in immediately so that there would be seamless, uninterrupted service. Next slide, please. Okay, in comparison, North Shore Regional 911 operations, as I mentioned, provides dispatch services to the towns of Essex, Middleton, Topsfield, Wenham, and the city of Amesbury. And that North Reading and Lynnfield are currently in the midst of feasibility studies, and several other communities are also considering joining. There's a limit to the size that dispatch centers become. And so there's a timeliness to our decision-making in terms of joining the regional dispatch in Middleton if we choose to do that. In the current dispatch center, their operation has 4 telecommunicators or dispatchers between the hours of 8 a.m. and midnight, and 3 telecommunicators between the hours of midnight and 8 a.m. So the graveyard shift has 3, and the other 2 shifts have 4. In addition, there is at least 1 supervisor on each shift, and the supervisor can jump in and take over the role of dispatcher as well. There are 10 workstations in the regional operation, which are available to allow for expansion. And their entire operation has a backup center in Andover. So through the Andover, what's called a PSAP, a public safety access point, Andover is the backup for the regional center operation, should, for some reason, the regional center operation go down. So that's another aspect of redundancy that makes sure that we have continuous available dispatch services. Next slide, please. The system that North Shore uses is, and I know this seems like I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, but I wanted to comment on it, is the Central Square IMC CAD system, or Computer Aided Dispatch System. The reason that I wanted to point out what the system was is that this particular system is compatible with the modules for both police and fire that police and fire are using. This would eliminate one of the aspects of software incompatibilities between the fire system and the existing dispatch system in the police station. The computer-aided dispatch system at the regional center integrates mapping, that is, I'll talk about mapping in just a minute. And it's a bullet point that's further down. It has a server interface with both police and fire record management systems. It allows for patient care reports, field operations, paging, crash reports, automatic vehicle location, and various connections to various state databases. The mobile data terminals would that are currently in police cruisers and in the 2 ambulances would be, I believe, replaced by the dispatch center if we were to onboard to regional with IMC mobile, compatible with this CAD system that I've referred to. And there's a bunch of different resources that are available on the IMC mobile that we don't currently have. Finally, mapping and GIS. The center can relies on services through Google Maps for location services, but it can also add GIS overlays for various unique needs in public safety dispatch. So one type of GIS overlay that they mentioned in their feasibility study was aircraft landing zones, helicopter landing zones that were available within the confines of a community. They coordinate their GIS with local municipal assessors to maintain map accuracy. So they would be in touch with our town assessor and coordinating the GIS system that we use with the software that was available at the center. In terms of radio systems, there's a lot of information in the report about radio systems. Suffice it to say that it connects to our existing UHF radio systems that are currently operating in Manchester by the Sea as of last August. They're working on further refinement and improvement of their radio infrastructure based on suggestions and experience that they've had from member communities. And they provide a fire station alerting service, which is something that our dispatch center also does. This last fact was something that came up in our tour of the regional dispatch center. 181 out of 351 communities statewide, 52%, over half, have regional 911 services. Some of that are local regional groups that have formed, and some of it is through the state. There are centers in Middleton, Tewksbury. There's one that recently opened on the South Shore. So the Commonwealth dispatch centers are opening as needed as demand occurs. And I want to be really clear about one issue in terms of, go back to the previous slide, please. One issue that has been something that's happened throughout our conversations with North Shore 911. This is not something that the state is pushing on us. In fact, we asked to have a representative from North Shore Regional 911 here tonight to answer any questions that we might not be able to answer, and they declined the opportunity. It's their policy not to engage with communities once they've engaged a feasibility study and are making a decision. It's their policy not to engage with them to try and rule out any type of influence that they might try and bring to bear in making a decision. This is not something that the state's pushing on us. Okay, thank you, Greg. Could you go ahead? So, as I said in my introductory remarks, we have the Board of Selectmen sifted through a lot of information and brought it down to two options that are before us. One is to substantially enhance our current operations, to bring it up to speed with 2 dispatches 24/7, and to unwind and correct the software incompatibility issues and other system integration issues. The second option is to join North Shore 911 and have their systems become our system. Now, there have been a lot of expressed concerns from previous forum and from conversations that people have had with the Board of Selectmen regarding regional dispatch. These concerns fall on both sides of those two options that I just mentioned. So I'm going to just run through these quickly. Simultaneous 911 calls requiring dispatch of public safety personnel, 60 to 75 a year, are a concern in that area of low frequency, high risk situations. A time delay with a call-in dispatcher arriving at the station of 15 to 20 minutes, which doesn't seem like a long time, but can be a critical amount of time in terms of emergency medical response or a significant fire event. And significant fire events are low frequency situations. I believe that the average is about 12 per year in the past few years in our community. The disparity and lack of integration between police and fire software systems and our computer-aided dispatch software. There's a lot of upgrading that would need to happen for us to bring our software systems into a completely integrated system where both police and fire have access to their records management systems and are able to communicate clearly with each other and with dispatch. The progressive loss of reserve officers for the available weekend and backfilling shifts. The unattended lobby in the police station. And the fact that dispatchers respond to walk-ins in the police station and that their services their primary job, which is dispatch, may be interrupted by walk-ins. A concern has been raised about the loss of local knowledge by PSAP staff, by the dispatch staff. If it's a regional staff, that they're not going to know our community like our local staff does. I just leave that right there. A familiarity of local staff with constituents and an ability to monitor both Marine Channels 9 and 16. That may not mean a lot to people who haven't been studying down in the weeds what dispatch is. But Marine Channel 9 and 16 are two different radio channels for boats. And 16 is an emergency channel. And 9 is sometimes referred to as a chat channel, where people carry on and talk to each other. North Shore Regional 911 will not monitor Channel 9, but they will monitor Channel 16. Currently, our dispatch monitors both. Next slide. Thank you. So the Board of Selectmen, as I said, has broken this down into two options, and we've asked to gauge public interest on dispatch and regional dispatch by placing a non-binding question on the May 17th town election ballot. First thing I want to address is, why is it a non-binding question? It's a non-binding question because decisions of policy fall within the purview of the Board of Selectmen, and this is a policy decision. The fact that it's a non-binding question doesn't rule out that the Board of Selectmen will listen very carefully to a town vote and consider it very carefully in any decisions that they make going forward. So the question is, and this is directly from the ballot that you'll see on May 17th, do you recommend that the Board of Selectmen pursue securing public safety dispatch services through the North Shore Regional 911 Center, phasing out local dispatching operations? I want to just explain phasing out. this is not something where you flip a switch. It will take about 10 months to a year to bring on board the regional center to take over our local dispatching operations, if that's the final decision. So that's what it means to phase it out. Next slide, please. This is all part of the question. The town administrator and the Board of Selectmen talked about how can we do this ballot question and provide some information without overwhelming people with the information that we're providing. And we took the format of state ballot questions where there's a brief summary that's attached, and this is the brief summary we've come up with. So for the last 18 months, the Board of Selectmen has been reviewing options for the delivery of public dispatch services, primarily to fire, rescue, and police departments. Our current in-house service has deficiencies, including antiquated software and limited staffing for handling large incidents or simultaneous incidents. The town needs to either bolster its in-house operations by providing 2 dispatchers 24/7 or seek services through a regional entity. The state's North Shore 911 Center has completed a feasibility study confirming its ability to provide the necessary equipment and staffing for dispatch service to the town, and is offering a no-cost contract guaranteed through 2029 and renewable through 2039 with the agreement of the parties. Under the regional model, the town will incur the cost of maintaining a receptionist staff lobby for 16 hours a day. Audio video contact will be available in a secure lobby area for the rest of the time. Under the in-house model, dispatchers will provide lobby coverage 24 hours a day. Couple of things in this. One is that 2029 guaranteed contract. That's only 7 years out. And previously we discussed this as a 10-year contract because that's what it is. But the regional center informed us that they want to keep all the contracts starting and ending on the same year. And the current contract is up for renewal in 2029. It's their expectation to renew the contracts in 2029 for a 10-year period under the same terms and conditions. But we need to be direct and completely transparent on this. Our first contract with them would be through 2029. The 16 hours a day would be from 8 o'clock in the morning until midnight. There were various proposals for how many hours a day. And the amount of traffic after 8 o'clock at night is pretty low. And perhaps even non-existent or very occasional. But there was a lot of concern about having an unattended lobby, and we decided we would start out with 16 hours a day and see how that worked and what the utilization was of that lobby assistant or attendant. Okay, next slide, please. This is all part of the ballot question. I broke it down into 3 slides for readability. The cost comparisons for the next 7 years in today's dollars for the Regional 911 Center, a 7-year town capital cost would be $20,000. That's mostly dedicated towards creating a secure lobby area for people to come in when the lobby is unattended. And that's a one-time cost. 7-year town operating costs are about 1.31 million, and that's based on costs to staff the lobby between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. 7 days a week. The regional, the in-house 911 service to resolve the software compatibility issues. In a 7-year time frame, the capital cost would be about $500,000. Those would be one-time costs during that 7-year period, maybe stretched out over the 7 years, but it's a $500,000 cost over that 7-year period. There would be subsequent capital costs after the 7-year period, but we're not going to get into that. The operating costs over the 7-year period would be $5.27 million, and this would be to provide 2 full-time dispatchers 24/7 to cover us for all of those low-frequency, high-risk events that might occur. And it's a recommendation that would bring us into alignment with certain public safety standards for dispatch. So a yes vote means that you're supporting moving to the regional 911 center. A no vote means that you're supporting increasing town capital and operating costs as described above to update our in-house dispatch service. As you can see, one costs about 4 times as much as the other in operating expenses and many multiples of that in capital costs. And that money would have to be found in the budget. The Finance Committee, in a meeting that they held this week, was concerned about the ability to come up with that kind of money over a 7-year period, and reiterated their support for moving to regional based on finances only. Okay. Last slide. That's the presentation. I didn't present all the details of the finances. We can get into that if necessary, but spreadsheets have lots of things that make them challenging to understand. Greg and I were going over some things in the spreadsheet that gave us those numbers that I just gave to you, and we spent about 15 minutes dealing with one issue. So at this point, we open the forum to questions and comments, and I ask that you please raise your hand in Zoom, or if you're on the phone, to please notify the chair and then wait for the chair to recognize you. When you're recognized, please state your full name and street address first before you start your comments or questions. Okay, so I have 2 people with their hands up. Kathy Bellata.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. I've a few questions. My first question.
Before you start, Kathy, can you please, you've given us your name, but could you please state your street address?
Sure. Sorry about that. Kathy Bellata, 21 Pine Street.
Thank you, Kathy.
On the prior chart where you showed the financials, I have a clarifying question. And that is, are those costs, both options, are they over and above what we will see in the town warrant that we vote on at town meeting from a budget standpoint? Or could you just describe if anything is over and above what we're going to see at town meeting, or if it's kind of all inclusive of what we're going to see at town meeting? So that was my first question. And then
let me understand your question, Kathy.
Sure.
Are you asking about the town meeting warrant that we'll see on the 25th of April at the annual town meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So you're asking what's the delta from?
Yes. So because a decision has not been made by the board, I'm trying to understand if the numbers you just shared, I'm trying to understand how they compare, yes, to what we will see next week, in a couple of weeks. So I'm not clear.
Okay. And you had a second question.
Yeah, I do have, if I could just ask a couple, so that was my first clarifying question, and then just a couple other questions. By the way, thank you very much for the presentation. It was a great summary and it cleared up some of my questions. And I also want to thank both chiefs who spent considerable time with me over the past week to answer a bunch of other questions. So thank you, everybody, for that. So with respect to the feasibility study and what we saw out of the regional center,
Yes.
I really like the best practices and clear metrics that they shared as part of the feasibility study. However, one concern I have is that the metrics are not frequently published. Their performance metrics seem to be published annually. So, and the last statistics they published on their website were from, I believe, April of 2021. So I understand, I'm hearing from one of the chiefs that they're going to publish their new metrics from last year shortly this month, but it seems odd that we can't get more frequent insight into their performance on a regular basis. So should the board decide to go forward with a regional option, I would strongly urge more frequent insight into their performance. And then the last.
Okay, Kathy,
Sure.
I'm going to hold you there.
Sure.
And let's see if we can answer your first question. The second question is more of a comment. Well, the second issue is more of a comment. And that is taken into account if the decision is to move to regional. So we have no control over the way that they publish the statistics now, and we'll have some input on that in the future if we should go to regional, but we don't have it now. So let me turn to Greg and ask whether, Greg, you could respond to Kathy's question about how do the numbers, and let's back up to that slide if we could. Nope, too far. It's the last slide before where we were, right there.
Yep.
Okay, how do these numbers for in-house 911 compare to the pre-existing condition, if you would?
Right, so the budget that is being presented at the annual town meeting is just the status quo. So voters will be just voting on the current operation for dispatch. So these numbers are wholesale replacements of the status quo. So you would eliminate the status quo numbers and you would substitute one of these two numbers instead.
Okay.
Timing wise, that it'll take most of next fiscal year before we would switch to a regional if that were the decision. And voters will need to decide if they want to supplement the proposed budget come the June special town meeting or wait until FY24 to bolster the in-house if that's the decision.
Okay.
And then just a quick comment in terms of the frequency of the metrics. So the regional center does have an advisory board both on the fire and police sides. And so our chiefs or their designee, they could serve on those, they will be invited to serve on those advisory boards and could get those metrics on a more frequent basis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sean Mullen.
Hi, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to say that mine mainly will be commentary. There might be a couple of.
Lost you.
Could he state his name, please, and address?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So Sean Mullins, for the sake of this, 10 Central Street, day shift dispatcher, reserved in between any other time than that. The main reason that I would like to speak is just to clarify a couple things on that PowerPoint.
Can I ask you a question before you start, Sean?
Absolutely.
Are you on duty right now?
I'm not, and I'm in my home.
Okay, thank you. Go
Thank
ahead.
you. All right. So in that presentation, obviously we appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to talk. There was a few things that I feel need correcting just so the public has the best information possible. A couple of them may be minor, a couple of them may be major. One of them, and attempting to go in order from them, is the mention that we had a CAD system. That is not the fact. We have an RMS system, antiquated, outdated, just records management, nothing computer aided about it. In regards to the radios, there was mention of coverage gaps. Yes, that is factual to an extent. We have 2 digital channels in town, and those digital channels have the ability to reach Groveland and even further. Crystal clear, no disruptions, no breakups. So I would say that the radio problems and coverage issues are merely non-existent.
Well, hold on, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely.
The information regarding radio coverage in the Magnolia area was provided by Chief Fitzgerald and Chief Cleary. So
Yep.
for you to say it's non-existent, I want to stick with the facts that have been published in the study and in my conversations with the chiefs.
No, absolutely. That's fine.
Thank you.
Just speaking from experience. So in regards to fires and May Day events, we have had a dedicated second dispatcher in for those fires, just to address that. One of the budgetary concerns was overtime on the weekends being filled by a full-time officer. I'd be more than happy to pull the stats for it, but rough estimate between many is that that hasn't happened in over a year. We have per diem dispatchers that cover the weekends, as well as us 3 full-timers. So the fact being put out there that police officers get a much inflated overtime rate for covering the desk, again, I'd say that's non-existent in at least a year. In regards to the backup PSAP point, only it was mentioned for the regional center. We do have a backup PSAP point, which is Rockport, as we are theirs. I've personally had calls roll over. It works flawlessly. Mapping and GIS software seem to get caught up a little bit on the ability to have LZs, landing zones on them for a med flight. That's all through State 911. That's leased technology. Everyone's on the same playing field with that. We have that capability as well. The secure lobbies was a major concern of mine, saying that it only costs approximately 20 grand. Is that number correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Just because I look at our lobby, obviously I'm there Monday through Friday. There's no ADA access. So what would the secure lobby be for an individual who has to obtain our services and, in compliance with that? Because right now the procedure is go through COA, up the elevator through town hall to our conference room. I mean, at that point, you're talking how many safe lobbies and at what cost?
The figure that's been given is a figure that has been vetted for a long time. I understand the ADA concerns, but there's separate monies that are going on and have already been allocated to build ADA access to the police station entrance. And this $20,000 figure is in addition to secure the lobby.
Okay.
So it's an accurate figure. It's an accurate figure.
All right. It just seemed very low considering the phases they would have to go through. But I understand.
I don't have the other
allocated.
Please don't talk over me. I don't have the actual figure in my head. Greg, I think it was $180,000 to establish ADA connection between the entrance to town hall and the entrance to the police station. But That's separate from the cost for doing the actual physical securing of the lobby. Okay,
I
I'm
believe
going to
for
ask
right
you, I'm
now,
going to
that's,
ask you to
yeah.
hold, I'm going to ask you to
I'll
hold.
wait for the second round.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, because
My
you've raised
pleasure.
a lot of questions. And I would ask Chief Fitzgerald. Assume he's here.
I'm here.
There you are.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember, you had some time that you were going to be away, and I think
No, I'm here. Yeah.
I think we did this to accommodate that. Can you comment on the overtime?
Yeah, since we've discussed this, and I've mentioned it to Greg in the past, over the last year, we have hired several, actually 4 part-time dispatchers, and that has since alleviated the overtime costs for full-time officers on the desk. So on the weekends, currently, we are staffed with part-time personnel, and they are strictly part-time dispatchers. They are not reserve officers.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Coyne,
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Very good, thank you. Well done, great presentation and very thorough. You put a lot of time and effort into it, and it's most appreciated. I, as a 40-year resident here, am against any kind of consideration of relocating.
Could Mr. Coyne state his name and address?
Sure. Robert Coyne, 115 Beach Street.
ahead.
Support the Public Safety Department Chief Fitzgerald, who is against this move with the consideration of losing the control that would result in once this is moved away from Manchester. Residents should be aware of the fact that, as in the case of Amesbury, that tried to get out of this contract, and according to what I've been told by the chief, they're stuck with it. They're still in it, and it's something that you cannot go back to your own dispatch. You have to go with another state 911 system. So once it's gone, it can't come back. And so in the summary that is stated there, it still seems to me to be very kind of up in the air, some of these things. They've guaranteed it for 7 years, but then likely it'll be through 2029. Well, that's not very, 2034, 39, rather, sorry, not very reassuring. And so there are some big questions that need to be answered there. With regards to the cost comparisons, I believe they might be fine-tuned because, as mentioned previous meetings, the fire department has already announced that he is going to be hiring 4 full-time personnel. If
I don't want to get into personnel issues in the fire department. It has nothing to do with regional dispatch.
well, I'm talking about something that the finance department should be considering because it was made public at Board of Selectmen meetings.
And if you
So
attend
that-
FinCom, FinCom meetings, they are very aware of it.
Well, I want to go on record as that this is a consideration that should be undertaken because it's something that's going to happen. Whether it comes out of one part or the other part, it's as a result of this move.
To tie personnel issues at the fire department to the decision to move to regional dispatch is inaccurate and it's not a quid pro quo.
Well, then I didn't hear it correctly, but he was pretty adamant about that. And maybe he could add something to it. But the other thing is that we're now looking at a 7-year contract, not a 10-year contract. So the figures need to be adjusted in the ballot warrant that I'm looking at. Maybe
The figures have been adjusted, Mr. Coyne.
pardon?
The figures have been adjusted.
Okay.
The figure for in-house service for 10 years was closer to, it was over $7 million. So the figures have been adjusted to address the change in the time frame.
All right, because I'm looking at 7,053,000 and 1,870,000.
I don't know what you're looking at, but the
Yeah.
figures that are on the screen right now are the figures that are 7-year figures.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking at what the election warrant is. So anyway, I think it's a little premature to make this drastic move. There doesn't seem to be a cry from the public that there's a need for it. It seems to me to be coming mainly from the fire department. So I hope that the public gets more involved in this process here before the Board of Selectmen make their decision.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time here, and I'll be standing by.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Coyne. I want to address the issue that's often brought up about Amesbury. The city of Amesbury did, in fact, have some concerns that were raised by some employees who were dealing with new software, and they put in a lot of complaints about the software and a lot of complaints about issues related to radio systems. Those complaints have all been resolved. At the time, Amesbury said that they were considering leaving, and they made the city council did a study to look for a regional partner, and because correctly stated, once the local PSAP is given up, it cannot be retrieved or returned. To clarify the actions of the city of Amesbury from my research on this, they looked at the possibility of leaving. They could not locate a regional partner that would provide onboarding at a cost that was reasonable to the city of Amesbury, and they decided against leaving and worked within the system to get their needs met. And that process took about 1.5 years. And from the city's point of view and city council's point of view, after which the most recent reports are that Amesbury is okay with what they've got and okay with working within the regional center. So that's an old set of facts, and the issues with the city of Amesbury were resolved, both from the city of Amesbury's point of view and from the city council's point of view, and the regional center. Regarding the fact that there's not a guarantee to 2039, That's true. But what we have, this is not the only regional center in Massachusetts that's run by the state. And what we have is communities that are moving towards the regional center. As I mentioned, both Linfield and North Reading have signed a letter of intent and are in the midst of a feasibility study to join North Shore 911. And the services that these communities are seeking, the services that are already being provided are stable services that go out through 2029 and most likely beyond. Now, I know I'll be quoted on most likely because I can't say guaranteed, but I think that the state has an investment in providing these services and will continue to provide the services past 2029. Even if there were charges for the services, once we're established in the rec, I think I saw a recent estimate that it would be about $80,000 a year. If it was done on a per capita basis, as it had been done under the sheriff's department. And that's a lot less than we're paying now. So the finances of this are pretty strong. That's not the only consideration, but the finances of this are pretty strong. Okay. Mary Foley.
Thank you, Mary Foley, 1 Pulaski Drive. Thank you for presenting facts. I have 3 quick, just clarification of fact. Would you like me to do them 3 at once or 1 by 1?
3 at once if you can.
The first one is, you said the 181 out of 351 municipalities have gone regional, but you didn't clarify how many went regional to state. Could you give me that number?
No, I cannot, not off the top of my head. I would have to look it up, but I could get back to you on that.
That would be great. The second one is, you said several other communities are considering joining. What are those several other communities?
In addition to North Reading and Linfield?
Correct. You clarified those 2 and then you said several others.
I would rather not mention other towns because they haven't made a decision or a letter of intent. But we are aware of other communities that are considering joining.
Okay, so none filing papers yet or anything, just the 2 that.
The only 2 that have filed a letter of intent and who are actually now engaged in the feasibility study that we completed in February are North Reading and Linfield.
Okay, thanks. The next one is, I think Kathy Bellata touched on it, and I apologize if I'm asking the same thing. I had to step out for a minute, but looking at the page that's up with the 7-year town operating cost of 5.27 million, I'm assuming that the added on is half of that, since we already have 1 full-time 24 hours. So I look at that.
Wait, excuse me 1 second. You're referring to a figure of 7.2 million?
No, 7-year, 5.27 million.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm assuming the added cost is half of that because it would just be adding 1 dispatch to the one we already have, correct?
Unfortunately, and this is why we didn't put up the spreadsheet, it's much more complicated to calculate this than to say, oh, you're just adding another person, so double it. Because it involves shift differentials, it involves a number of different things. So we're not trying to keep these numbers out of the public's eye, but they're very complicated to explain. And when the finance committee saw the spreadsheet that Greg was working from. These are people who have very good skills in reading spreadsheets, and there was a lot of explanation that had to happen. So it's not just doubled out.
No, understood, but just for the sake of discussion, to just kind of say, okay, if we have one rotating multiple shifts dispatch position and we need to add a second, then if we say that then becomes double of what we currently have with some wiggle room, right? So, just extrapolating out the numbers from the 5.27 million for 7 years, if you put that in half of the 2.85 million divided by the 7 years, are we currently paying for one full-time dispatch shift $407,000 per year?
It is close to that. Again, it's not exact, but in ballpark figures, you're correct. You're basically doubling your cost, but it's not an exact doubling because there are variables, but in round figures, yes.
Okay, all right, good, all right, because I just want to do that to extrapolate out some other numbers, but I'll do that on my own.
Just to be clear, Mary, that's 24/7.
Understood.
So you have to consider that what you're talking about is 21 shifts.
Correct, understood. And then my other last quick one is just a point of clarification. There was a slide that said low frequency, high risk. I wasn't clear if that also related to simultaneous 911 calls, if that was one and the same. And if it wasn't, how many low frequency, high risk calls do we get?
Okay. Greg, you want to go back to that slide, please? If you could. Okay. Let's start with the second bullet point. Emergency response calls averaged over the past 4 years at 540 a year, about 1.5 a day. That's a low frequency event. It's not less than 1 a day, but it's a low frequency event. Every one of those calls is potentially a high risk situation. The simultaneous calls, when 2 different 911 calls are coming in at the same time and the dispatcher has to manage both, run somewhere between 55, 60, and 75 times per year. Those are overlapping calls. So even though there's 1.5 just EMR calls on average per day, that doesn't mean that they're coming in at the same time. So the simultaneous calls are 55 to 75 times per year. Mutual aid response varies. And the need for, there's always a need to monitor the mutual aid on dispatch, but the need for the dispatcher's direct involvement in it is not necessarily an everyday type of occurrence. And mutual aid responses are mutual aid requests don't have a frequency that you can say, okay, there's this number a year. They happen or they don't, depending on the severity of the situation that or event that we're involved in. Firefighter May Day events, according to Chief Cleary, a May Day event where a firefighter is cut off in a building typically happens in the first 15 to 20 minutes of being on site. And requires a dedicated dispatcher when it happens. Thankfully, those are very infrequent events. Unfortunately, they are very high-risk events. They're the type of event that we look at and say, thank God we have someone else who's walking into that building, not me. So, and in terms of emergency medical response calls that require the dispatcher be dedicated to that call until on-site personnel secure the patient, we have 540 of those a year. So that's kind of a summary of what those high-risk situations are. And you could say, well, that's not very much. Why do we need to put in a whole other person all the time? And that's a very legitimate question. Until you're on the receiving end of being a second call. And something happens as a result. We have really good dispatchers in town who have done a really good job. But these situations raise questions about how adequate the overall dispatch service is. I'm not questioning the skill or ability of any dispatcher that we have. But this is a lot to ask. And that's only one of the reasons why we're revisiting it. That's the low frequency, high risk situations. So, Mary, I will get back to you with the breakdown on the state, regional, and local regions when I can get that information together. I hope to be able to do that reasonably soon, but with town meeting coming right up, there's a lot going on, and I'll try and do it as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Is there anybody else in the public? Because the two people have already spoken, have their hands up, and I'm willing to take their questions and comments. Before that, is there anybody else who hasn't spoken yet that would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, this is Sandy.
Sandy, didn't we already hear from you?
Nope.
Not tonight.
I apologize, Sandy.
Oh, sorry, I have another phone call going here. Hold on. Okay, good, it's not going. All right, thank you. Sandy Rogers, 82 Old Essex Road. I have some questions about access to the data. So where on the town website can I find the most up-to-date spreadsheet of financial analysis that you are working off of right now?
Give me 1 second.
When I went to the dispatch site, I saw some old spreadsheets. I didn't see anything new. I saw the report, which you can see some of the capital expenses outlined in that report, but I'm really, curious about looking at the details of the operating estimates.
Yeah, we can put that new sheet up. That isn't up there currently.
We can put that new sheet up, and Sandy, I can send you a copy of the spreadsheet that I was working off of, which is the sheet that will go up.
Fabulous. Is there also a link to the data on our current dispatch use? I've heard it referenced a few times. Can that be put up as well if it's not there?
There is, in the feasibility study, data from 2018 to 2020. In communication with both chiefs, Greg and I have collected data for 2021. in the areas of emergency response calls and I forget what the other area was. So I redid the figures and added in 2021.
Okay.
But the much of the use data is available in the feasibility study, which is on the dispatch section of the website.
Okay, great. So it's embedded in there. I must have, okay, great. So I have a question.
And Sandy, I would let you know that there's separate sections for police and fire in the dispatch study. And so when you finish looking at the police, you want to keep going for a couple of more pages to get to the fire.
Okay, great. So I'm wondering if there has been an analysis on a couple things. One is, has there been seasonality analysis regarding our use and anticipated use of dispatch, especially because we are a highly seasonal town? And second, has there been an analysis done based on future growth expected in our town? We have a lot of housing that we're potentially going to be taking on at 15% when you look at some of the housing, whether it be of development done by developers or some of our own housing initiatives. So, has any extrapolation done on both of the different scenarios of what it would be in-house versus outsourcing it to Middleton?
Okay. Those are really very interesting questions. I have a feeling that if I asked the chiefs to come up with that data, they would groan, because it's very hard to get that data out of our current software system to get down to frequency and other than the numbers over long periods of time. But Chief Fitzgerald's here and he's got his hand up, and so I will recognize him to, if he would unmute himself, I will recognize him to respond to the future growth analysis and the seasonal analysis that you're asking about.
Fabulous, thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. I've looked at our call volumes in the past from our phone system and our current records management systems. And if you were to do an analysis, you could see that our busiest month in the years past has been July, with the second busiest month being August. So it definitely spikes in the summertime. And then, the slowest time of year is obviously midwinter, January and February. I can share that data or try and put something easy to read and send that to you. So you can probably put that on the website. And as far as the second question, I don't have any data
The one on future growth, Todd?
On future growth, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, my recommendation is that should be looked at as we go into looking at 7 years and then extending potentially out beyond that, what it would mean to the town to keep something in-house and costs and what might happen if we explode out. The town hasn't seen any type of growth like this. And it would be good. I know that might be very difficult for individuals in the fire and in the police to anticipate exactly, but I think some type of modeling and looking at what that might mean, what it would be to have like a compressed type of population potentially, all the scenarios that the town is looking at, it would be really interesting to see how that might impact the analysis. So thank you.
I appreciate your question, Sandy. It's a very sophisticated question. And I think that it's going to to do that kind of an analysis involves creating models that we have not used to date. And
So,
Greg,
yeah, no, go ahead and finish, Jeff. I was just going to offer.
I'm fine.
Okay. I mean, it's not particularly overly sophisticated, but sort of a rule of thumb is, you know, so we're at 53,400 as a population. If you look at a Hamilton or a Rockport in the 8,000 range each, and compare their staffing for dispatch and for police and fire, you will see that we are very comparable already. So they're managing population that's 50% bigger than us on a very similar staffing model. So it's a little crude, but it does give you some basis. And basically you have, you know, it's not linear. For every person you add, you don't have to add more service. There is capacity within the system to provide services to a bigger population. Obviously, there are tipping points, but it would take quite a bit for us to get to a significant tipping point.
Great, thanks. And I'll look forward to looking at the details that are posted.
Okay, thank you. Kathy Bellata.
Thank you. One question on the concerns page of the presentation, you listed, summarized very nicely the concerns that have been voiced thus far for both options, right?
Can we go to that page, Greg?
Thank you. So in terms of the two budget options that the town is facing, would the chiefs agree, both chiefs, that either option takes care of their concerns? Or would there be any outstanding concerns with option one and any outstanding concerns with option two? And the reason for my question is, once a decision is made, if there are outstanding concerns, that could mean additional cost in another budget cycle that has not, we haven't estimated. So just, both chiefs, looking at both options, do they address your concerns? You talked about failover of the ISP. You talked about a number of different issues. Just kind of high level, is there anything outstanding in either option? Thank you.
I'm sorry, Chief Cleary.
To address the question, I would say the only outstanding concerns I would have, I don't have the concerns going to the rec because I understand more of the overarching standards that they hold or currently meet. My only concern with staying is it would require much more than just doubling the personnel. It would require needing restructuring, equal input from fire and police with respect to hiring policy, decisions as to what standards we were attempting to achieve or meet and how we were going to get there. So it would be greater than just putting a second person sitting at a second desk. It would have to be revamped almost, in my opinion, as its own entity, standalone with fire and police oversight, similar to how the regional center works. But those plans haven't been designed or vetted as of this point. So that would be my biggest concern in staying. But the two dispatchers would definitely address more of the immediate concerns with respect to being able to do emergency medical dispatch, to handle a May Day, and to handle simultaneous calls. But that would be the short-term benefit, but there would be much more long-term planning and redesign that would be required to get it to where it needed to be.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chief Fitzgerald.
Yes, thank you. I tend to agree with Chief Cleary. However, I feel that between him, and I and Greg and the Board of Selectmen, those concerns of revamping, we can come to some sort of mutual agreement on how that's going to work. My concerns with leaving is the loss of a little bit of the local control, and also the finality of it. I mean, once we go and we're not coming back, and that's my major concern, not only as the chief, but as a resident of town.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike, could you identify yourself, first name and last, and your address? You need to unmute yourself, Mike.
I'm sorry, Jeff. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Jeff, it's Mike Rossmarin at Crooked Lane. I appreciate all this information, and I'm going to try and digest it the best I can. I think I have two questions, not concerns. I'll just say questions. The question is, I'm really focusing on that delta between that 5.27 million that's going to be over 7 years. What is actually the delta? I think that's more of an accurate number for us to wrap our heads around. Are we going to be spending 2 million anyway versus the 5.2? I'd like to know what the difference is, and I think that should be on the ballot question more than anything. Second to that, we've been a town that's been very good at getting grants. Of that 5.27 million delta, how much of it can be covered by grants and things like that? Because that's always known as available, and there's always stuff that's out there. And I don't know the answer. Has that been vetted? Has that been researched? Has that been looked at? That's only my first question. I'll get out of the way with my second question. The second question, it's showing.
Hold on.
Okay.
To respond to the grant question.
Yes.
The 5.2 that you're referring to is operational expense.
Right.
And in the long-term, grants and operations are incompatible. In the short term, they're okay, but in the long term, they're not, because we do have to absorb when grants end into the budget.
I'm not.
There are grants available for the capital expenditures.
That was the question.
It may be available for some of the capital expenditures, but Mr. Fetterspiel may be able to respond to that better.
All right.
Just a little clarification. So it is, it may be possible to get some of that equipment through grants, the capital. The operating, that 5.27 million, assume that we continue to receive about $70,000 a year in 911 funding through the state. And that, I believe, if I'm correct, Chief Fitzgerald, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's call volume based. So I don't think that number would go up even though we would add more dispatchers.
Well, we can put in for the reimbursement through the grant through training. So if we add more dispatchers, their
Some additional
training,
training money.
additional training monies would be covered, yes.
Okay, and some of the capital costs for radios, equipment and things like that, that would have a lifespan larger than the 7 years in theory. So the 5.27, some of that would not carry forward going, it wouldn't be 750,000 a year, for instance, going forward.
Wait a minute, stop for a second. I'm not sure where the 750,000 a year is.
Well, I'm saying 5.27 and divide into 7 years.
Okay, but the capital cost is totally separate from that. They're 500,000 over the 7 years.
I guess that's what I'd like to see separated, and how much of that would not extend further.
It's
How much-
it's already separated in the ballot question.
Okay,
Capital costs are at 500,000 over 7 years. And the other cost is an operational cost.
I understand. And I guess going forward over 10 years, I'm wondering how much that would look like 15 years, because we're looking at 2039 on some of this stuff too. But what I'd like to see is what the delta is of that 5.27. How much of that is above and beyond what we would actually spend anyway? I'd like to see that number. The other thing I'd like to know is the number that was presented is that currently there are 4 full-time dispatchers on the first shift, plus a supervisor. That's 5 dispatchers. So therefore, there's 5 towns that are currently in this. So they're only covering 1 dispatcher per town currently, if each town had a call. Is that correct?
That's not how it works in terms of their setup. They have dispatchers. It's more complex than just those numbers in terms of how they actually operate and how the supervisor assigns who's doing what. It doesn't equate to 1-to-1. One town, one dispatcher.
Oh, I understand
And
that.
they expand their dispatch staff as needed in terms of the call volume, and they do it on call volume. And the call volume for Manchester did not require them to expand their staff.
Oh, I understand that. I guess what I'm
But if
asking,
Manchester, North Reading, Linfield, and any other towns joined, they might see fit to increase their staff. That's why they have 10 workstations.
I understand on a current basis right now, they have in theory 5 dispatchers if you include the supervisor, and they have 5 towns. So right now, with 5 phone calls were to come in suddenly to that center, well, let's say 10 phone calls, let's say each town had an accident and an EMS occurrence.
Great question. If that were the case, they're right next door to them in the regional operation center is the state 911 operation. And they're all trained dispatchers, and calls would roll over to the state system for mobile 911 and be dealt with that way.
Does ours do that currently?
What's that?
Do our 911s roll over to the state anyway?
No, not currently.
Because if I on 128 and I dial 911, I'm getting the state.
Yes, but if you're within the border of Manchester by the Sea, you're getting our police station.
If I dial 911 on my mobile?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, those are my 2 questions.
So just to clarify for you, Mike, the state 911 people pick up any call overflow that would come out of regional if that should happen.
Okay. And to clarify, they would pick up any overflow from Manchester if I was calling inside of Manchester, or not?
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I would take any comments from the Board of Selectmen at this point. that you want to add to this conversation? I'm any things that you wanted to say that I left out? Becky Jakes.
One quick question. When you were mentioning the various transmitters and receivers currently in use, where is the Brookside one?
The Brookside, you'd have to ask Chief Fitzgerald and Chief Cleary that question to be accurately represented. And it's not on the grounds of Brookside. It's in that area of town. Chief Fitzgerald, do you want to take that, or do you want Chief Cleary to take that?
I think it's Chief Cleary's equipment, but I think you're talking about the Brookwood School.
Yeah, it's in the attic of the Brookwood School.
Oh, so it's Brookwood. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
That's why I said that they should take it.
Thank you. Well, Greg, Jeff had a lot of work on this. Thank you very much. Thank you and a lot of good questions this evening from people.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Becky? Nope. Chief Fitzgerald, you still have your hand up. Is that something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just have a couple of clarifying things that were mentioned earlier, probably one or two, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
No. Well, first of all, I want to say thanks for doing this, Jeff. This is excellent presentation. One of the things that I noticed in the feasibility study, and it was mentioned tonight, is our current radio system. Dispatcher Mullins is correct that we have two digital frequencies currently in town. However, our main channel is not digital. In my current capital request for this year's budget, I think it's around $8,200. That would finish on the police side of things, our frequency upgrades and make our main channel digital, which should help the Magnolia end of town. The current radio system, since we had the infrastructure upgrades, our main equipment at the water tower does have generator backup. I think Chief Cleary can correct me if I'm wrong. The only thing that we're waiting for, I confirmed with our radio provider yesterday, is the batteries for the equipment that's at the compost on that tower. Due to supply chain issues, that's why that hasn't been installed yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's about it. Oh, the other thing is we don't monitor channel 9 for the marine frequency. It's only 16, and that's when Bion, the harbor master, or our personnel are on board the boat. So it's not something that's monitored all the time. It's only when our personnel are on duty and on the water. And one thing I just wanted to add, that according to my numbers, I think you put them out in the packet for tonight's meeting. Our walk-ins have almost doubled from 2020 to 2021. I know it's not a lot. I did sort of a breakdown as to call volume, and part of that call volume is most of our walk-ins are on the day shift between 8 and 4. The second most are on the 4 to 12 shift, and it is limited, like you said, on the midnight shift. But however, I just wanted to reiterate, most of those walk-ins on the midnight shift are not just for dropping off paperwork or informational purposes. It's actually people coming in that want to have some sort of service, whether it's an EMS service, a police service, or a fire service. So staffing our lobby, in my opinion, is critical, and that's pretty much all I have to say.
Okay, let me just comment on a couple of things that you just said. In the feasibility study on page 9, and I assume that this was data that was submitted by you and Chief Cleary. Says, while conducting our survey, we noted that the primary repeater site, which is the one at the water station, the water tower, had a battery backup, a UPS, but lacked generator power. So unless that's been changed since the data was submitted for the feasibility study, that's the study information that was reported to the state.
Yeah, that is incorrect, and that was in my memo that I sent to Greg and Sharon in trying to clarify that point.
Okay, so there's a working generator at that site.
At our main equipment on the water tower, there is a generator. Yes.
Okay. In terms of the lobby walk-ins, the figure that I gave incorporated the 662 walk-ins that you reported for 2021.
Okay. Yeah.
And averaged it over the 4 years of 2018 to 2021.
Okay.
And that totaled 1,664 walk-ins over that time period, 416 a year, 1.1 per 24-hour period.
Yep. I mean, it is tough, I think, to calculate that on a 24-hour period because, some days we may have none, some days we may have 5. So
Sure.
Yeah,
with all these events, that's the case.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, okay, I just wanted to make that point. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Chief Cleary.
Yeah, just a couple items. Again, I echo Chief Fitzgerald, Jeff, and the quality of the presentation tonight. I appreciate it. A couple of items. When you were mentioning about the simultaneous 911 calls, those 68 calls that we had last year, that was fire and EMS calls simultaneous, which police also respond to, but that doesn't take into account that police could have gotten separate 911 calls or made traffic stops or anything else at the same time, further stretching the dispatcher's ability to handle multiple calls. That's just from the fire and EMS side.
Yes.
So there could be additional calls. With
Thank
respect
you for that
to
clarification.
no problem. With respect to May Days, we haven't had one here, and they are infrequent here. However, if you look in the fire department literature, there are multiple May Days across the country every day, in everything from commercial buildings to single family residences. And in my career, I've been involved in 3 May Days myself, both on the May Day side of things as a firefighter and also as an incident commander managing them. And they are very harrowing and they happen unexpectedly. And like you pointed out, any call could turn into a May Day. And in our business, we have to plan for the worst and hope for the best. So that's why we're looking for that added dispatcher support. The only other thing is with respect to receiver sites, we do have a receiver on the Essex Fire Tower, and that one does not have battery backup and does not have a generator. And any of the radio information I submitted, I got directly from Northeast Radio. So if there's a discrepancy, we can follow back up with them. But I got the information to them to submit for the feasibility study because they're the ones that design and maintain the system. And then the last point I have, and this is more a matter of public information, with either dispatch center, if we stay or go, when you call 911, you get fire, EMS, and police in the same period of time. So we're not going to be any quicker or any slower with either dispatch center. You get the same quick response by emergency personnel, regardless of where that 911 call goes, whether it goes to 10 Central Street or to Middleton. And I just want to allay any confusion of people that I've spoken with that don't understand how that works.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments from the Board of Selectmen? Any other public comments? Well, this could be record time. I appreciate all who have joined us tonight. In fact, we've increased up to 33 participants at this point. I appreciate all the support that I've gotten from Chief Fitzgerald and Chief Cleary, and the magnificent support of Greg Fetterspiel in helping to create this presentation and to respond to the questions that have been brought by the public. I think most of all, I appreciate the tenor of our discussion tonight. Hopefully, this is the way that we can continue to work together to provide information and make informed decisions with an informed public. And the tenor of this, the civility of it, is something I'm very happy with. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn unless there's any other comment that needs to be made.
So moved.
And a second, and thanks very much, Jeff and Greg. Excellent.
Okay. This is not to be discussed. We will take a roll call vote. Mr. Bowling?
Yes.
Ms. Harrison?
Yes.
Mr. Round?
Yes.
Ms. Jakes?
Yes, and thank you very much.
And chair votes yes. I thank you all and good night, people.
Thank you, Jeff.
Good, everyone.
Thank you, Greg.
Victor, yeah.